I'm pleased to welcome you to Finding Growth in Media Services, a webinar put on by the World Teleport Association as part of its ongoing series of reports and tutorials for our industry in figuring out this very complex and difficult to understand path ahead. My name is Robert Bell. I am Executive Director of World Teleport Association. And if you're not familiar with us, to describe as briefly as possible who we are and why we matter, we're here to advocate for the commercial interests of teleport operators, and that is an important task right now because teleport operators do their business in a very complex market in which the companies that are their customers, companies that are their vendors, and companies that are their competitors may all be the same companies at various stages in the game. So it's a difficult and interesting commercial set of relationships, and we're here to help those teleport operators navigate them. We're also, on the other side of that, here to promote excellence in operations, technology, and business practices. And we do that through reports like the report you see on your screen, Finding Growth in Media Services, and this webinar, as well as through our teleport certification and related programs, all designed to raise the level of quality of service for all customers of all teleports everywhere to increase the competitive advantage of the industry. Today, we're going to be looking for about an hour at the topics that were raised in our report, Finding Growth in Media Services. So after my introduction, I'm going to share with you briefly some key insights from that report, which is available for free to all WTA members and can be purchased by non-members as well at our website. We'll then have a panel discussion with some people who know a great deal about this topic, and we will look forward to having some questions and answers toward the end, and we very much want to include your questions and answers, and I'll explain in just a moment how we go about doing that. Our panelists are all very experienced veterans of broadcast, media services, and actually every other part of satellite. They are Jay Laprice, who is the Senior Vice President for Global Transmission Operations at Encompass Digital Media. And Jay has been in this business and knows it from the days of analog through to high order modulation delivery going on today. With him is Scott Mumford, who is the CEO of Liquid Telecom Satellite Services. He is experienced in every part of this industry, and Liquid, which is best known for its work in developing economy markets, is actually very active in the business of media services. And finally, Stephen Sonens, who is the Vice President for Product Marketing at Skyline Communications. Stephen and I have known each other for a very long time, and he is a really technology executive's executive in terms of his ability to, as an engineer, his ability in product management, and his ability to get products to market and into the hands of customers who are satisfied with that experience. And finally, I'm very pleased to thank the set of members of WTA, whom we call industry leaders. Their additional financial support makes possible our entire series of research reports throughout the year, as well as the webinars that we're increasingly doing from them. And they are Eutelsat, Liquid Telecom, Intelsat, SES, and Kratos Defense and Space. So thank you very much to those companies that have made that, I think, very wise choice. Okay, so here we are. We are at the end of an era. This picture on the screen is not too different from what I experienced. We didn't look quite so clean cut when I was a kid. But when we started out, this is what television was about. It was that electronic hearth around which we all gathered. And of course, today's experience couldn't be more different, both in distribution technology, in have the viewer experience of same, and in the devices on which we receive our media. And that dramatic change has really just run through this industry. And some of these numbers are just very familiar to us all, but they're still shocking. Streaming content viewing hours in the US market alone grew some 72% year over year from 2018 to 2019. It's 50% faster than the previous year. Subscriptions to streaming services surpassed cable TV back in 2018, reaching 613 million, again up over a quarter from the previous year. And at the same time, pay TV providers began fulfilling the predictions that had long been made about them by losing some 3.2 million subscribers in 2018. And by the first quarter of the following year, it was estimated they were losing some 14,000 subscribers per day. So those are really tough numbers. and the entire industry, from the media and entertainment companies through to their vendors, have been adapting to this at extreme speed. When we do research reports at WTA, we go out and talk to teleport operators, satellite operators, technology providers, and just get them to tell us how this market is changing underneath them and what they're doing about it. What came out of this report were two basic strategies, not surprisingly. One, of course, is to go on maximizing the revenue and profit that you can get from your existing business. And teleport operators are helping their customers to do that, in one way by optimizing satellite capacity. There's still plenty of places in the world where there's room to push to higher order modulation and coding that it's not there yet. So that's something that teleport operators and satellite operators are helping their customers with. And they're also acting in the role of business consultants, because again, in many places, broadcasters are stuck with viewers using old technology, old DVB receivers, for instance, that require more bandwidth to deliver the business. So the question then becomes strategic. Do you step away from them? Do you just say, hey, I'm not going to support that audience anymore? And customers are making up their minds around it. And of course, then the big one, how do we help the traditional broadcast industry, media and entertainment, develop OTT as a complement to what they're doing right now, and to do it in a way that manages this just exploding complexity that comes with it. And my own favorite about this, the conversations I actually have enjoyed most have been with some of our most experienced media and entertainment service providers saying, I'm dealing with all these data companies, and boy, do they know data. But when it comes to broadcast, they actually don't understand it very well. And so teleport operators have an opportunity in many cases to actually be the experts in contribution and distribution. So where are they going to go looking for opportunity? The good news is the teleports sit in a very desirable position in the chain. They're already, in many cases, they're already carrying the customer's content. So their opportunities become to leverage that ability to aggregate content in a way that would be very difficult for any other company in the value chain. And that becomes a differentiator in selling OTT services. Another strategy that's being pursued is to expand the teleport's traditional role as a meet-me point between the skyway and the highway, as we say, and become an on-ramp to the cloud and to commercial CDNs. It's not a big leap, and it's being done in many places, but as a core business strategy, I think it's a little bit new. And finally, there is this issue of managing workflows and play out across all these different transmission paths. It's become far more complicated because the distribution needs to go to so many different devices in so many different places. And then because it's one-on-one, this is unicast technology ultimately, there's the need to regionalize content. There's the need to manage blackouts as we've always done and to provide dynamic content and advertising replacement. Big opportunities for the future, and many of our members are pioneering in that area. So that's enough for me as an introduction. We're going to talk to some people who actually know this content inside and out. Again, they are Jay Laprise, Scott Mumford, and Steve Sonens. I want to just remind you that you do have a question panel, so as questions occur to you, just jot them down, send them in, and I will do my best to work them into the conversation. And so, gentlemen, Jay, Scott, and Stephen, welcome, first of all, to the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And so could I ask each of you to start by telling us just a bit about yourselves and where your company fits into this media contribution and distribution market. And Jay Laprise, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Robert, and thank you all for listening. So Encompass Digital Media is a global provider of traditionally linear video as we continue to migrate and really which is what this entire conversation is about. But we have facilities based in North America, South America, Europe, and in Asia Pac. And we handle transmission both for contribution and distribution from those facilities and locations. My role, as indicated in my title, Global Transmission Operations and Engineering, really is responsible for making sure that we get from point A to point Z, and that at no time does anything stop at any one of those letters in between.
I like that very much, Jay. Good description. Scott, how about you from Liquid Telecom?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Afternoon, everybody. So Liquid Telecom is actually more of a data telecom provider than your traditional broadcast media provider. And as part of that, we've always had a satellite services business. In fact, the company started as a satellite services business way back in early 2000s. However, a couple of years ago, we were approached about providing a DTH broadcast media service that was run out of Africa for Africa. And it seemed like a good logical step for us to take that leap, given my background, which started in the media side of satellite communications back in the mid-90s. Since then, we have acquired a compression head-end system as well as a CDN, and obviously we're tying that in with the provision of OTT and data services, as you would expect at this point in time.
Excellent, and thank you for that explanation, because when I first heard about Liquid and media, I thought, really? But now I understand the history. Finally, Steven Sonens, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Steven. I think a lot of you may know me already. So I'm running the product marketing activities with Skyline Communications. So Skyline Communications is basically a technology supplier, a software company, providing, let's say, NMS and OSS solutions to the media and broadband industry. Our history is in media, our history is in broadband. These two delivery methods or technologies come together. I mean, like OTT is basically requiring a media component, but also a broadband connection, of course. So that's really our habitat, so to speak. So we're a pure software house, basically monitoring, managing, and orchestrating media workflows across the board. And that goes across, let's say, the traditional hardware devices that you would find in a network, like IRDs, like encoders, multiplexers, and so forth. But equally well, that would include, let's say, cloud infrastructure. Nowadays, we see that more and more. But also, of course, any type of IP network connectivity, including MPLS type of networks or pure IP solutions. With that, we monitor and orchestrate workflows for contribution, for remote productions, for distribution workloads over DTH, distribution to headends and towers, and that goes both for linear content, but equally well for file-based assets exchanges over these networks. So we're a technology supplier. We also have a strong team that really partners with our customers to understand the workflows, document the workflows, and implement them on our platform, DataMine platform.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it's a big product and seems to get a little bit bigger every time I talk with you. So let's drill into this. And Jay, I want to come back and start with you, just because your company has probably been in this particular market for the longest period of time. In fact, it was kind of rolled up from other companies, specifically, I think, to access some of these opportunities. So our report did conclude that media customers still have plenty of needs. They're just different needs than they had before. So what do they need today?
Well, first off, and this hasn't changed any, reliability and the ability to deliver content to the end user. That has not changed. What is changing is that distribution method and how it ends up at the final user. So this being the WTA, obviously, we've very centered on spacecraft and transmission via satellite. But what we're seeing and continue to see, and obviously I think your introduction really brought that point home, is how that first step in the process is changing. The method that I think traditionally in DTH is really where you're seeing that big change take place in North America specifically. But we all know that the MVPDs are changing their model from being a linear cable network distribution or broadcast distribution to really being the big pipe to the house. And so they're very actively involved. They're changing their numbers from one set of products over to another set of products. So staying in touch with that particular part of the distribution chain is really a big focus on how we as a company, Encompass specifically, and I think our industry in general need to continue to maintain that touch point. So delivering that media content to those handoff points is really going to be how we change a little bit. Obviously for North America specifically, with the change in C-band and the reduction due to the 5G repack, that's going to have to make us focus on how we handle that contribution and distribution portions of the chain. But it's still, once again, all about getting that content to the final user. The pipes being used are going to be a little bit shorter. And I think that we'll see as time continues to evolve, that distance to the spacecraft gets a lot shorter. So as a teleport operator, being able to be flexible in your forms of transmission from GEO to LEO and MEO is going to be a big point also as we evolve over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yes, it is. It's one of the contributors to our report, and I have no idea who it is. I'm just the editor. Said that as near as he could see, 5 years from now, at least in the MSAs in the U.S., there would be no satellite delivery. And I thought, there's a strong statement.
Overly ambitious, I think.
You think it's overly ambitious? Okay, interesting.
Take into account that it roughly took us. We're almost 20 years into the digital distribution of content, and we still have a considerable amount of channels that are being distributed purely SD. So saying that we're not going to have a satellite delivery method, I think in 5 years is a little bit ambitious.
Yeah, we'll find out, won't we? All we have to do is wait. Stephen, let me just turn to you in terms with this question before I bring Scott into it. So you've been serving media customers on the software and that wonderful word orchestration side for a long time. How are your customers' needs different today than they were, let's say, 5 years ago?
Yeah. So indeed, so we've been in this market for a long time, be it on the distribution side, be it on the content aggregation and contribution side of things, and even production. The needs definitely changed in terms of being able to monitor infrastructures only to, let's say, full orchestration and monitoring together. So let's say automation and orchestration has become table stakes with any project that we do. We rarely see projects anymore where we just have to do the monitoring piece. And that has to do with what Jay was mentioning before. I mean, there's a lot of, let's say, attempts and successful and some unsuccessful. Attempts from media companies to deliver new types of services, be it OTT services or be it remote production services. Some of these services may run over cloud, over internet transport, and over satellite, of course, as well. Now, these changes, this level of agility basically requires that your monitoring infrastructure, the way you evaluate your service levels, the way you monitor your infrastructure itself, continuously adapt to the different ways you basically deliver and process these media services. And today, in today's environment with media companies, channel lineups, channel services would change definitely on a weekly or on a bi-weekly basis. So with every configuration change, the monitoring system needs to adapt to that and follow the changes. And vice versa, if you change the monitoring strategy, we may have to reorchestrate some of the services on the network. So definitely we see a big change into fully automated workflow execution across multiple technologies, ranging from satellite, SCPC or VSAT link management, to fiber, to cloud and traditional, let's say, internet transport capabilities. And with that automation comes, of course, the need to use resources in a highly flexible manner, but equally well in a highly effective manner. So resource management basically goes hand in hand with service orchestration and monitoring.
Every time I speak with you, Stephen, I remember there's an old joke in the States that said to make mistakes is human. To really screw things up, you need a computer. So I'm always amazed that automation works at all. But you've used a couple of key words that were in our report: flexibility and agility, which is what customers are really demanding, and that does drive everything to a software solution. Scott, so you've got a long background in media, but media is pretty new for Liquid. What are the customer needs that you're hearing today, and how do they contrast with your experience in the past?
It's a bit of a strange one from our perspective, Robert, to be perfectly honest, because as you know, and as many of you who know me will know, Liquid obviously are predominantly or entirely African based, which comes with a unique set of challenges anyway. It's a vast continent, obviously, as we know, but it also serves both the old world technology, as I would call it nowadays, in terms of your traditional DVB, MPEG-2 services, as well as quite a high demand for your more recent OTT device-based content. So we see a real split in terms of how that content is demanded by the consumer at the endpoint. But I think as a teleport operator, the flexibility is absolutely critical, but it comes at a price. It's very expensive to be able to be that flexible and commit to the level of infrastructure you need to be able to provide that. I think the real key to success is from a teleport start point is leveraging the services that you would traditionally find provided from teleport, so your VSAT services, and how you integrate them to media with the use of IP and broadband, specifically around, say, SNG and video contribution over that infrastructure.
That's a very interesting comment, because it was something else that came up in our report as well, that, and I don't know how established this is, maybe Jay can speak to this, but the operators we talk to are perceiving an opportunity to use IP transport basically to fill caches for mobile base stations or mobile data centers, as being sort of the next generation of terrestrial distribution, which I find a fascinating concept. I'm sure there's some of it happening. I don't know how predominant it is. So Jay, let's just dive into that for a minute, because so you made it sound like a lot of continuity from the old days to the new days in terms of needs, and yet the services that you're actually offering have got to be dramatically different in many cases to help customers with their OTT needs. So what do you have to put together as a service package?
Well, and it's an excellent, and as Scott was pointing out, and it was sitting here nodding my head in an agreement with him, that the first step for many of our current OTT customers is a traditional teleport service, downlinking and transport of content from one place to another. And it's the monitoring of that, the alarming of it, the verification that it is making it to a CDN for handoff. Those are traditional teleport type levels of service. And it's an area that we as Encompass have done very well in the last 2.5 to 3 years as that has really started to grow. And with that growth, there is the difference, and I think you accurately pointed out that there are guys who really know data and how to get it from A to Z. But managing that media that is now part of that data is really something that we know well. And it's the combination of those two forces together which are going to deliver the end product to the consumer down the road. So making sure that everybody is in step and working towards that end goal is really where I think both sides of the equation are going through a tremendous learning process. Now, what are we doing to make that happen? It's beefing up the skill set of our teams. We are finding that there are some people who are still excited by a challenge, no matter what age frame they happen to be. We have found that there are others that, all right, the world has changed around me and I'm not quite sure how I fit in. Maybe it's time to move on to a different environment. So I think generally for those people that joined into this industry 15, 20 years ago, and you got into it because you enjoyed the challenge of making things work and seeing something happen and go from an idea to implementation, those are the people that are still excited as the industry continues to evolve. And they were excited to learn the new skill sets. But at the same time, people that are coming into the industry as a younger starting point, relying on the people that have been there before and how to get that first part of the process started provides an awful lot of personal satisfaction on making that all happen.
I'm interested that you went to the people. Obviously, we normally spend time talking about technology, but yeah, this is still, media has always been a very labor-intensive part of the teleport business. Not so many nailed-up circuits just running by themselves, and I guess that hasn't changed.
Correct. It still requires a lot of interaction on a daily basis. Even the quick turn up of events at a streaming level still require traditional setup, verification, checkpoints, and then monitoring while the service is occurring, and then tear down at the end. It's all about how the distribution has changed, but the functionality behind it really is a 50, 60-year-old process.
Yeah. Scott, so you've got to bridge this gap you described to us, which means your service mix must be quite an interesting one. What are the services that you need to deliver to meet those needs?
Yeah, it is a very interesting mix, and I think I would echo exactly what Jay was just pointing out around the upskilling of your staffing. As sort of from a teleport perspective specifically, a lot of the teleport engineers, obviously have a lot of RF skills and so forth, and many years ago we saw them upskill to the IP layer skills and the Cisco certifications to incorporate the networking side. This is really just the next iteration of that in terms of, a lot of the core media skills are still required in terms of understanding broadcast quality and contribution quality video audio services, and tying those into a file format and network side. And that's really how we've packaged it as a product offering from the Liquid side. As I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of legacy technology in Africa with the traditional DVB MPEG-2 services. Obviously we've been trying to push them to more efficient MPEG-4, HEVC, higher modulation coding scheme services to really optimize the cost point. But I would say one of the most interesting things we've done is tie in that compression platform to be able to do full transcoding for HEVC as well as the population of the CDN. So as a media service provider, we can take that contribution audio video, pop it into an encoder and output both the required video audio format files for CDN population, as well as feeding into the traditional DTH multiplexers at a more legacy sort of transmission medium. So it's really a case of having been creative around how you tie those services into a single product offering, all managed by a skilled set of engineers within the teleport environment that understand that media, IP, and transmission environment all as a single service provider. Because ultimately, that's what the customer wants. They want one service provider that understands the full value proposition end to end, that they trust to be able to deliver their content for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a long way from the days when you had to manually prepare each one of these clips for the different formats of the devices that they were receiving, and I remember broadcasters just moaning about that. And wow. So in terms of tech, so that brings us to the question of technology. Stephen, so your system is, broad and enormously capable to doing the things it's doing. What specifically for a teleport operator or a broadcaster are you doing to help them make that OTT transition in the least painful way?
What we're doing in that respect, and maybe I can first add on to what Jay was saying. I mean, an OTT setting up an OTT service is not necessarily that much different compared to, let's say, a traditional linear service. A lot of the steps are still in place. The only difference is that the technology underlying has been changing, and that's where, let's say, we see a lot of migrations towards IT infrastructure, with developing specific IT modules that go together with the media modules into our system. What we also see is that even though the core processes are the same for a linear service or for an OTT delivered service, so to speak, the way the processes are managed is changing. And we're trying to help in that aspect. Even though the core process is still the same, we're investing in technologies, for instance, to enable end customers, so the customers of the teleport operators, to provision their own services. We have a lot of projects today where we have a multi-tenant setup in the teleport or with the service provider, where end customers completely provision their services on that infrastructure of the teleport operator. That's more cost effective. It gives a much better, let's say, utilization of the resources, and of course, for the end customer, it gives a better experience. In terms of the delivery itself of the OTT service, of course, that can be delivered over CDNs or anything like that. What we're doing there, as an example, we're working today together with one of the leading infrastructure and service monitoring companies, probe companies for that matter, to dynamically deploy probes as there is a need to, let's say, deliver services in one or another location on whatever CDN network there is. So as people, let's say, deploy services across the world over multiple CDNs, because most of people choose indeed a multi-CDN approach, because CDNs do perform differently in different regions and have a different costing for that matter as well. So as services are rolled out in an OTT play in different regions, we automatically orchestrate probes in that cloud close to the CDN POPs, so to speak, as part of the provisioning process. So it's all about automation, and it's about automation not only of, let's say, the traditional media functions, but equally well automation of the underlying IT deployments, including deploying cloud infrastructure as an example.
Interesting. Well, I mean, let's stay on the technology theme for a bit. I mean, automation is something that came up again in our report, the need to take a very complex series of functions and make them run relatively with a limited amount of human intervention. But Scott, let's come back to you. I mean, what for you right now are the critical technologies to continue having success in your marketplace, which with its broad range of needs? You've mentioned one of them, this ability to generate both DTH and even at MPEG-2 all the way up to feeding content into a CDN. But what are some of the other things that you're coming to depend on now?
I think we're very much still in a transition period in terms of where this is ultimately gonna go. You know, the CDN infrastructure is a critical element, but also the optimization of that content and for delivery across multiple platforms. You know, that's still really a big challenge for us that the technology is still developing on. You know, if we take a look really at you know, AWS and Microsoft Azure as two main ones, you know, as well as obviously the addition of Netflix and Apple TV and Disney Plus and so on and so forth, we're finding that getting that high quality 4K and you know, even talking 8K and upwards, which is, you know, a mind-blowing concept. You know, the bandwidth requirements that are required to move that quality of content is huge. And as we move towards, you know, the advent of 5G, you know, where the media storage and you're talking edge computing and edge cloud, you know, the optimization and how we move that content around is a critical element in terms of the bandwidths that we can provide that on. Satellites, obviously, you know, as Jay was mentioning earlier, I think around the teleport operators with LEO and MEO and those higher bandwidth services for distribution, you know, those bandwidths are going to come into play, but there's definitely got to be another big jump in the throughput capabilities of the RF chains that are associated with those.
Right, because yes, indeed, because the customer will never buy as much bandwidth as a satellite operator might like them to buy. Your comment made me think of something that we've seen in a couple of WTA's recent reports, which is, and it's a through line I've seen from comments, and the comments basically end up being, increasingly, we're just seeing our teleport as being an extension of the cloud. We're seeing our teleport as being an on-ramp to CDNs, that almost, our teleport's getting very fuzzy edges because the infrastructures are blending. Does that, I'm just curious what your response to that is. Is that a real thing in your world, and what does it specifically mean?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a very real concern. That fuzzy edge or demarcation point of your responsibility is blurring. I think it's always been a little bit of a blur from my days when I was in video and network engineering. It was always a discussion point that caused a lot of laughs on or stress, depending on which side of the fence you sat. But yeah, it is becoming a blurry line. But it's one I think that the teleports are more than capable of dealing with. You know, as I said, most teleports, you know, 10, 15 years ago started to really develop their IP skills and their networking skills. And as the platforms have improved and the efficiencies have improved, you know, the internet pipes coming into the teleports have expanded it hugely. You know, I mean, if I look at just one of my teleports, you know, we've got 12, 16 core fibers coming in, each carrying 10 gig. So, you know, we're talking hundreds of gigabits per second of data capabilities. So actually, you know, the skill set's there, and I think the teleports really need to embrace that fuzziness. I think, you know, a quick route to problems is being hard and fast about what you do and what you don't do. You know, you need to kind of build that brings back the flexibility play.
Jay, what about you? I mean, when I say that the teleport's developing fuzzy edges because it's hard to tell where it ends and where CDNs, the cloud, and other services begin, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think Scott hit on a really excellent point here, is that at one point, if you said, all right, I've got fiber connectivity to my teleport, and that was one step. And now then it became, well, do you have fiber providers coming in from dual entrance? And then that was the next step. All right, now do you have multiple fiber providers coming in dual entrance? How much growth do you need to continue to add to satisfy, as Scott pointed out also, this bandwidth requirement that is just growing in leaps and bounds, not only from the transmission side point, but also from our ability to aggregate and distribute at that level. So you can't just continue to stay satisfied or think that you've reached your maximum point. This is an ever-changing industry with technology as its core driver. It's why we got into it to start with. And being able to adapt and continue to change your focus on how you manage your overall infrastructure, which is the tool to get that end product out. So I think that's really what is most exciting about where we stand right now, is how do we take something that we're used to using, you know, in some cases been in a facility for at a physical location for the start of the distribution time frame of our industry. How do you continue to make yourself relevant and desirable? And that's by being flexible, by being willing to not hold on to traditional methods to make sure that you stay viable. So those are the things that I think, you know, myself and as a company, I'm really looking forward to. And obviously, as I said at the beginning, you know, we're going through a major change here in North America as far as what we're capable of delivering to bandwidth-wise. But that reduction in bandwidth then sets up another form of technology change for us. Let's get from some MPEG-2 DVB-S carriers that are still being transmitted, get them over to, you know, something that was state-of-the-art, you know, 10 years ago, just as a reduction part. But there are going to be clients and consumers who are ready to make that next step. It's established technology. Let's get to HEVC. Let's get to 16 APS-K modulation types. On our transmission platforms, at a teleport, we're ready to make those changes. We have the technology to make that. It's the end user, meaning, you know, the MVPDs, the infrastructure that they're going to need to change to make sure that they can handle those higher orders of modulation. Running carriers with very little FEC to make the most available bandwidth usable for the delivering of that product, because we have less overall bandwidth to deliver to, is all part of it. So I think there's an awful lot. We know the timetable for 3 years is going to be very, very aggressive. There's a lot of people who've got a lot riding on the next 5 years on how this industry continues to adapt and evolve.
Like I like to say to my wife, hey, honey, at least remember you've never been bored. Stephen, so all of this complexity that Jay was just talking about at some point or other plugs into a software platform, which presents some interesting challenges, I would think, for your company. What does that look like as technology keeps changing underneath? The physical technology keeps changing underneath you, and the software interfaces keep changing. Your company has to adapt, right?
That is correct. And as a company, we build a platform to enable, let's say, the full management of the services across the infrastructures. As mentioned, we invested and continuously invest quite a bit into integration of IT platforms. And that includes, let's say, physical data center technology in terms of compute nodes, storage nodes, IP networking, and so forth. But equally well, all layers of virtualization, including virtual machines, including containerized environments, including, of course, cloud functions as well. And tying that all together, because you mentioned before, Robert, that the networks are getting blended, and that's indeed the case. If you look at it from a distance. However, if you look at it from a technology perspective, I would say that the definition of the boundaries of the networks are better defined than ever, so to speak. And I'm referring now specifically to the fact that networks are driven by APIs much more than anything else. In the past, boxes used to have user interfaces or even front panel controls. Today, networks are driven by APIs, and those are clearly documented. So from a technology perspective, the networks may come together and form one big network, so to speak. But the boundaries are very well defined in terms of APIs, in terms of capacity and capabilities of those networks, and therefore also in terms of SLAs. So management of SLAs on the boundaries, being able to integrate with any type of infrastructure and API is something we invest in heavily as well. Automation on top of that, automation runs on top of that. It's table stakes to be able to talk to any component or network, whatever you have. And that includes your own infrastructure, but to my earlier point, also your partner infrastructures. So as a teleport operator, you may have to partner with cloud providers. Integrating that API, but also integrating the workflows is going to be critical. Equally, your partners are also your customers, so to speak, of the teleports, having them automatically provision the networks, and through that provisioning of the media services on the teleport, indirectly provision also, for instance, your partner's technology, including cloud infrastructure. So it is getting more complex. The good thing is it's more documented. It's all API driven. That's a nice thing for us. And that helps us also to leverage, let's say, smart technologies to analyze and manage the network more proactively. Meaning that the more APIs are documented, the more data we have access to. And having a data-driven infrastructure allows us to use technologies such as artificial intelligence to help operators make the right decisions in terms of capacity planning, in terms of troubleshooting, in terms of forecasting, and many more use cases. So AI really is going to help us a lot to continuously reduce the level of complexity going forward.
Well, yes, while making it incredibly much more complex underneath, it's yes, as you say, from a management standpoint, it gets easier. Okay, so this has been, I mean, this is the rate of change is enormous. One of the places that the rate of change, I hope, has become large scale is that we did it, I think we did a report 3 years ago about OTT, and the common complaint there was that it was, you know, the traditional phrase of the time was we're trading, well, it used to be analog dollars for digital pennies, but in this case it's digital satellite dollars for OTT pennies. It was a really tough market because a lot of investment had to take place before the profits came in. In this report, the general consensus of the people we talked to was that yes, you have to be flexible, but the business once established is actually, you know, a viable business. So I want to ask our two operators, Scott. I mean, you're started pioneering in this area for Liquid now just a few years ago, but is OTT turning out to be the business that you'd hoped it would be?
Yeah, I think it is. I think one of the key advantages to it is the reach it gives you. You know, you're not specifically tied to necessarily a geographical limitations of a single satellite footprint, or having to increase that cost model every time you want to expand into a new footprint. You know, the per subscriber revenues are lower on OTT, but it's a pure volume based business. Those subscriber numbers are huge. They're tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people out there accessing via devices, and it does take time, like all businesses. I'm sure there are some that have boomed overnight, but for us it's been a relatively steady start. But we the services that are coming from our platforms are making money, and the margins are not huge on a per service base at this point, but obviously as they continue to scale up, that margin will be there. But it's going in the right direction at a much earlier point in the deployment of the services than your DTH or traditional satellite broadcast startups, because of the very high costs that are involved at the start of that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it's a lower cost model. Jay, what's your? I mean, Compass has just done has been pioneering in this area now for quite a few years. What's your experience?
I agree completely with Scott's overall thought pattern. The infrastructure required to get started in this space is really something that the teleports have traditionally been in. So evolving into that delivery method is something that has seemed very logical. It has been a slow, steady pace. As your report indicates, the last couple of years we've really seen the growth begin to take off. The numbers and margins required from an OTT provider are much different than they were in our traditional linear partners, and that's just where things are moving. But at the same time, we're also seeing our linear partners start to come back or come down also. I'm not sure we're going to get our OT guys up to where linear numbers are, but it is an evolutionary process, and I think as we continue to make use of the resources and at an Encompass level on a global basis to be able to hand off services that originate in one part of the globe to another part of the globe using our existing infrastructure, and expanding that technology as a partner and provider of services is what we're going to continue to push forward with.
Yeah, okay, so this technology, I mean, on some level, you get a chance to sweat your assets very, very effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to just ask the question. So we've seen a lot of change, and it's impossible, especially in the age of COVID, it's impossible to know what next week's going to bring us. But what do you see when you look into your crystal ball for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of the development of the business? What kind of trends should we be looking for? And I want to start with Stephen, because that's you're going to have some, from your standpoint as the system of systems, you're going to have some very interesting insights here, I think.
Yeah, well, I think we already touched upon the automation bits and pieces. That's going to be table stakes. It is already table stakes today. It's not implemented all over the place, but automation of service life cycles as well as processes end to end is what I think the number one. The second one is effective using resources, and effective means that you can use effective resources that you have on-prem, but also effectively an efficient use of cloud resources, and being able to swap those resources easily is going to be the number two, because cloud remains expensive. It's not like cloud is inexpensive. If you scale it up, there is a cost to it. So efficient using cloud providers in a multi-cloud environment and being able to switch from one to the other is going to be fundamental as part of the strategies, I think, of media companies. Already touched upon data-driven operations, so artificial intelligence will definitely grow in terms of importance. And then last but not least is the collaboration aspect. So companies will not stand on their own. I mean, our industry will increasingly have to rely on partnerships. Everybody cannot do everything. That's impossible. So collaboration within media companies or Teleport itself, but also across your customers and your, let's say, capacity providers is going to be fundamental going forward.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. Scott, what's your view of the few years ahead?
Firstly, I just want to say I agree completely with what Stephen was just saying around the automation and the AI side. I think that's going to be a real key area, as well as the collaboration of companies together. I mean, that we're already seeing that in the industry around companies that can specialize in, or that do specialize in specific areas, partnering with their peers in order to provide that higher level of service to the end customer. I think from a crystal ball perspective, I think the advent of 5G and edge storage and content access from the edge, I think is going to change what satellite is or is used for in the media side. I think it's going to be a much more a distribution method to the 5G networks. And I also think we're going to see a bit of a split, a polar split in how the content's generated. I think we'll see a consolidation from the main content providers that I mentioned earlier, your Disneys and Netflix, but perversely to that, also, more demand for hyper local content where, the internet access is there, and you get a lot of very hyper local content being available on those CDNs and that coming in as well. So I think it's going to be an exciting time for all of us as this transition happens.
Yes, that is that's a very exciting future that you just outlined there. Jay, last word to you on this.
Well, I think understatement is going to be exciting. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of activity for all of us. I think I agree completely with all of the points made that cooperation as we fundamentally change. I think Stephen said it correctly, that we're users, we're competitors, and we're partners on many different levels with many of ours in the industry. And I think that's the only way we're going to continue to evolve. We all have to be adaptable to our situations and staying focused on that end delivery and client satisfaction is what we're really all about.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Scott, you opened up the topic that I've been thinking about behind the scenes a bit, which is that, satellite's always been powerful because it's multicast, and the limitation in streaming delivery has always been its unicast. And I do believe that we're going to get this interesting blended model where we're multicasting out to the edge, and then the unicast has a lot less distance to travel. So there's going to be I think some very interesting architectural changes in how we distribute media. But that's what we have time for so far. So I want to thank very much Jay Laprise, Scott Mumford, and Stephen Sonens for sharing their experience and expertise with us on this topic. I want to thank as well our industry leader members, Eutelsat, Liquid Telecom, Intelsat, SCS, and Kratos Defense and Space for making this program possible.